Welcome to the week number 6 overview video for Microeconomic Principles here at Rutgers University. And in week 6, we're going to be going over chapters 7 and chapter 8. So for chapter 7, we are discussing and looking at the production process. And there's a few things that are important for you, just to give you this general notion of what's going to be important during the semester. When dealing with the behavior of profit-maximizing firms, remember the following, that profit-maximizing firms in all industries must make 3 choices: how much output to supply, how to produce that output, and how much of each input to demand. Also, remember that profit equals total revenue minus total cost. Total cost, economic cost, includes out-of-pocket costs and the opportunity cost of each factor of production, including a normal rate of return on capital. A normal rate of return on capital is included in total cost because tying up resources in a firm's capital stock has an opportunity cost, an important point. If you start a business or buy a share of stock in a corporation, you do so because you expect to make a normal rate of return. Investors will not invest their money in a business unless they expect to make a normal rate of return. A positive profit level occurs when a firm is earning an above normal rate of return on capital. So make sure you understand those previous points. 2 assumptions define the short run: a fixed scale or fixed factor of production, and no entry to or exit from the industry. In the long run, firms can choose any scale of operation they want, and firms can enter and leave the industry. To make decisions, firms need to know 3 things: the market price of their output, the production techniques that are available, and the prices of inputs. We then move, to the production process. Make sure you remember this about the production function. The relationship between inputs and outputs to production technology, expressed numerically or mathematically, is called a production function or total product function. Also remember that the marginal product of a variable input is the additional output that an added unit of that input will produce if all other inputs are held constant. According to the law of diminishing returns, when additional units of a variable unit are added to fixed inputs, after a certain point, the marginal product of the variable input declines. So make sure you remember that. Average product is the average amount of product produced by each unit of a variable factor of production. If marginal product is above average product, the average product rises. If marginal product is below average product, the average product falls. Capital and labor are at the same time complementary and substitutable inputs. Capital enhances the productivity of labor, but it can also be substituted for labor. For choice of technologies, remember that one of the key decisions that all firms must make is which technology to use. Profit-maximizing firms will choose the combination of inputs that maximizes costs of producing any given level of output and therefore maximizes profit. And finally, the appendix, make sure you're comfortable with this. Also, you will probably notice that it looks very similar to the analysis we did for utility maximization. Make sure you remember an isoquant is a graph that shows all combinations of capital and labor that can be used to produce a given quantity of output. The slope of an isoquant is equal to negative the marginal product of labor over the marginal product of capital. The ratio of the marginal product of labor to the marginal product of capital is the marginal rate of technical substitution. It is the rate at which a firm can substitute capital for labor and hold output constant. Also remember that an iso-cost line is a graph that shows all combinations of capital and labor that can be purchased for a given total cost. The slope of the iso-cost line is equal to negative the price of labor over the price of capital. And finally, the least cost method of producing a given amount of output is found graphically at the point at which the iso-cost line is just tangent to the iso-quant corresponding to that level of production. The firm's cost minimizing equilibrium condition is where the marginal product of labor over the price of labor is equal to the marginal product of capital over the price of capital. From there, we shift to Chapter 8, which deals with short-run costs and output decisions. So in the short run, there's quite a bit of information about costs. Make sure you're comfortable with all of them. Realize that fixed costs are costs that do not change with a firm's output. In the short run, firms cannot avoid fixed costs or change them even if production is zero. Also remember that variable costs are those costs that depend on the level of output chosen. Fixed cost plus variable costs equal total cost. Average fixed cost is total fixed cost divided by the quantity of output. As output rises, average fixed cost declines steadily because the same total is being spread over larger and larger quantities of output. This phenomenon is called spreading overhead. Numerous combinations of inputs can be used to produce a given level of output. Total variable cost is the sum of all costs that vary with output in the short run. Have a good notion of what marginal cost is. Marginal cost is the increase in total cost that results from the production of one more unit of output. If a firm is producing 1,000 units, the additional cost of increasing an output to 1,100 units is marginal cost. Marginal cost measures the cost of the additional inputs required to produce each successive unit of output. Because fixed costs do not change when output changes, marginal costs reflect the only changes in variable cost. In the short run, a firm is limited by a fixed factor of production or a fixed scale of a plant. As a firm increases output, it will eventually find itself trapped by that scale. Because of the fixed scale, marginal cost eventually rises with output. Marginal cost is the slope of the total variable cost curve. The total variable cost curve also always has a positive slope because total cost always rises with output. However, increasing marginal cost means that total costs ultimately rise at an increasing rate. Average variable cost is equal to variable cost divided by the quantity of output. And average total cost is equal to total cost divided by the quantity of output. It is also equal to the sum of average fixed cost plus average variable cost. We then move to the output decisions, revenues, costs, and profit maximization. A perfectly competitive firm faces a demand curve that is horizontal. Make sure you remember that. That's quite important. Excuse me. In other words, it's a perfectly elastic demand curve. Total revenue is simply price times the quantity of output that a firm decides to produce and sell. Marginal revenue, on the other hand, is the additional revenue that a firm takes in when it increases output by 1 unit. For a perfectly competitive firm, marginal revenue is equal to the current price of the product. Make sure you remember that. We're going to be using that later on in the course. And finally, a profit-maximizing firm is in a perfectly competitive industry will produce up to the point at which the price of its output is just equal to its short-run marginal cost. So therefore, when price is equal to marginal cost. The more general profit-maximizing formula is marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. That only holds in a perfectly competitive market.